welcome to episode 11 of Terpenes and Testing, the podcast. This broadcast is brought to you by Mace Media Group and Terpenes and Testing magazine, the industry's first publication dedicated to cannabis science. I'm Jason Lupoi, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Terpenes and Testing magazine, and I'll be your host as we navigate across the landscape of cannabis and psychedelics science. The importance of terpenes outside of cannabis has been demonstrated for decades in the scientific literature. But early on in the cannabis industry, many people looked at cannabis as no more than a delivery system for THC. Nowadays, more educated consumers and product manufacturers have come to understand that terpenes are what differentiate cannabis cultivars, and they also provide valued entourage effects with cannabinoids and other terpenes. Interest in terpenes seems to be at an all-time high, and with good reason. So for this episode, I wanted to speak with Kevin Koby. Kevin's fascination with cannabis began in his early years in Southern California as he worked with family and friends on cultivation operations across California. He went on to earn a bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of California at Santa Barbara, where he excelled in organic chemistry and gained valuable experience in a world-renowned materials research group. Kevin's work in cannabis manufacturing began 5 years ago when he was one of the first chemists to manufacture, analyze, and popularize highly concentrated solvent-free cannabinoid oil. Eventually, he became head of new product development, and his products were awarded Best New Product in the High Times Cannabis Cup 4 times. Riding the wave of success, Kevin was recruited by Kingpen and Loudpack and was made vice president of manufacturing and R&D. He was responsible for creating, managing, and scaling in-house production, and he went on to earn at least 12 more High Times Cannabis Cups for vape pens and 4 additional awards for his concentrates. Most importantly, his ingenuity took the company from outside dependence for concentrate to producing 40 plus kilograms of high quality concentrate every week in an economically built production facility. Beyond leading science and technology for ABSTRAX, Kevin consults with top cannabis equipment manufacturers and concentrate manufacturers facilities throughout the United States. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. Happy to be here.
So you once told me that it was fate that got you into the cannabis industry, that at an early age, you and your friends would talk about getting into the industry. And I was curious if you could talk about the path you took to create ABSTRAX.
I think in high school, I think I was even telling people, cannabis was legalized in 1992. Coincidentally, it was the year I was born. I would call that a little bit of fate. Growing up, it was definitely prevalent, all around our town. And as I was growing up, you honestly couldn't avoid it. And then even when I was in high school, everyone was asking me like, "Oh, what do you want to grow up and do?" And I was like, "I'm gonna work with cannabis." It's like one of the things I liked very much in high school, and brought balance to my life at that point. And I kind of just stuck with that all through college, and as soon as I graduated college, I had a single focus just on cannabis. That was a time when it was pretty unpopular to pretty much do that, before regulation, everything of the sorts. Before 2016, certainly.
So ABSTRAX is definitely heavily focused on terpenes. Can you talk about why you chose to work with terpenes as opposed to other types of products like what I mentioned in your bio, like vape pens? Why is ABSTRAX more focused on terpenes?
Oh yeah. So if you grow up with cannabis and cannabis well, and you start working in manufacturing cannabis, I built multiple facilities where all we did was scale up THC production. But then it doesn't take very long to realize that the special sauce is the terpenes. That's the most important part. There's even pharmaceuticals that make synthetic THC, and people take those pharmaceuticals, and it's not at all close to what the enjoyable experience of cannabis is. And the main component that you're missing there is, what we colloquially call the terpenes, which is everything else, essentially. All the esters and the thiols and the terpenes, terpenoids, and everything else. And so, we're specifically interested in the special sauce and everything, that the most enjoyable parts of cannabis is what I would call those.
So you guys were one of the first groups that I had seen, and I don't really actually think I've seen this elsewhere. You guys are using two-dimensional gas chromatography, and that kind of, in to my knowledge, was pioneered by ABSTRAX in the cannabis industry. And I was curious, what has your work with 2D gas chromatography offered you that traditional gas chromatography would have never allowed? And also, if you could point to any specific molecules that you've been able to kind of unearth from the cannabis plant using 2D GC that you probably would have missed if you were using traditional GC.
Oh yeah. As much as I would love to take credit for pioneering 2D GC, I don't think we pioneered that, but it is very rare. It's specifically helpful for exactly what we're using it for, right? Which is, we're on discovery missions every day. We're trying to discover what's new, what's unique, what's different, what's, where is that secret sauce essentially. And when growing up in the industry, you're stuck, definitely in the past days when you're stuck. I used to be an analytical chemist, and I was stuck with 12 terpenes on a standard.
Right.
And then we grew up and we got 24, and we thought that was a huge jump. And then we grew up and we got 48. It was almost like RAM in the tech industry, right? You get so many bits, and then it doubled and quadrupled, and then it like hit 1,000,000x, from the 90s to the 2000s. But now in analytical chemistry, they saw the same type of advancements. And when we first started ABSTRAX, we invested pretty heavily into designing our own type of analytical chemistry equipment, our instrumentation. So much so people were calling us like just flat out crazy at that point. They're like, why would you ever spend this much on instrumentation? You're not a testing lab. And it was unpopular at the time, but everyone's starting to see the benefits of it now. I mean, we could tell you straight off the bat, the reason we did it is that none of these GC results are accurate. I mean, when someone gives you a result with 12 terpenes on it, and just the way that the analytical chemistry works, that one peak is not just that one compound. That now we know from looking at GC plots, I mean, that could be 20 compounds. It could be more. It's just everything that's, you're looking at a cityscape from the water versus, a helicopter. There's not just one building on the ocean. There's, if you're looking at New York, there's 100 buildings behind it. And so that's where we believed all the secret sauce was behind those initial compounds. And, we were, fortunately we were right in that hypothesis. And so we've discovered numerous compounds since.
Why do you've definitely expended a lot of time to try to understand and, each component of a given plant's bouquet. And I was curious why you think it's so important to recreate that plant's flavor and aroma. Like, why do this deeper dive? You mentioned people thought it was crazy to spend so much money on more sophisticated equipment. Why is that important to you?
That's a great question. I find myself I've asked that question a couple times as well. And if you're asking why, I think it's a multi-pronged answer. Certainly the largest component of that is just passion. Another component of it is, part of that passion is being a scientist and having to ask why on everything, and then just being frustrated with the answers that are currently available and just wanting to answer things better. And then, as another prong as a scientist is you want to be able to pioneer in the field that you're in. And, PhDs in cannabis aren't available today. So, this is the only way to gain more knowledge in cannabis, is to honestly just go look for it and go do it. And, the third and final prong of that is it's going to make us a better business at the end of the day. I mean, that's exactly what our business is, and we need to know the best about what we do. And if we intend on innovating, we have to be the ones to do it in the best way possible. And that was the best way possible at that time and place.
Yeah, I think that's a really neat aspect of what ABSTRAX is doing is that you are trying to, you're not just trying to take the dominant terpenes that make up a given plant's, you know, characteristic essential oil. You're trying to get down to the nitty gritty and really, you know, recreate that to the maximum effect that you can.
Yeah, those main terpenes we're finding out are actually quite diluted into a lot of these formulations. It's cannabis is super unique. The more we study it, the more we look into it, the more unique it is to us.
I saw that you guys are going to be working with, or are working with, Dr. Avery Gilbert, and he's going to be an upcoming guest on the show. Uh, I
Awesome.
I had a chance to hear some of his work at one of the American Chemical Society's CAN meetings, and it was really interesting. He was publishing some work that showed that he basically had a group of like a focus group of people smell different cultivars and point out what they thought they could smell based on a bunch of descriptors he found on the internet for different cannabis plants. And what was really neat about the study was they broke down into two main categories of plants. There was like a citrusy group and like a earthy or woody group. He used chemometrics to break those up. And what was really neat was that people were, well, outside of the fact that they thought they could smell potency, the citrusy plants were more popular with the focus group. It was a small group, but still, and they were willing to pay more money for uh, those specific plants that had that citrusy aroma. And I thought that was pretty neat. And I was curious how you guys are working with Dr. Gilbert.
Yeah, I mean, personally and company wise, like we're huge fans of Dr. Avery Gilbert. He's a rock star, and we've done smell studies with him in the past with various formulations on how they might make somebody feel. How would this floral formulation make you feel, or how would this citrusy formulation make me feel? Uh, I guess I can go in more in depth on that because we actually released an entire product line with Dr. Avery Gilbert and the studies that he conducted. We used we did a collaboration with a company called Budboard. They're also great people to work with. They helped us in writing an AI program that would predict based off feedback they've gotten from consumers and the strains and the terpene profiles the consumers were, consuming. And they filled out a form that said how it would make them feel. And based off that feedback and the AI algorithm, they produced, rough formulations on how this, if we were to optimize, a sedative effect, for example. And we took that in, we gave it to our flavor team optimized that. And then we took it to Dr. Avery Gilbert to go and validate those results. And, thank goodness, yeah, those were validated with all the focus groups that we had going through there. And that's our AI terp effect product line that we have. And so a lot of our customers love to buy those products and mix them with like our Cloudburst series, which is like very, very flavored forward. You only have to use them in very small amounts. And so Dr. Avery Gilbert was absolutely instrumental for that entire product line.
With the AI terpene blends, I saw on your website that it reads that they deliver specific effects based on over 1 million data points, and I was curious what those data points included. Was that the survey information that you just mentioned, or was that something different?
Yeah, it would be a combination of the terpenes of the strains that the consumers would be consuming paired with the surveys that they're submitting. And so that's a ton of data to track and even more difficult to like correlate. So That's definitely where, people smarter than myself, the bud board people will jump in there and make order out of chaos.
Yeah, that's definitely a lot of data to sort out. So that's neat. And I think the other question I had for you regarding uh, kind of how you guys have been studying different molecules outside of terpenes in the plant. So I mentioned a couple questions ago that you're using 2D-GC to kind of do that deeper dive and see what else is in there that makes up that specific plant's characteristic aroma and flavor. And you were involved in a publication in ACS Omega recently. And I think that a lot of times people attribute the odor of cannabis to terpenes, but that's not necessarily the complete picture. And I was curious if you could talk about the research paper that you and your co-authors published. And, uh, I guess one of the main things I was curious about was when maybe this is giving the punchline before you've gotten a chance to answer, but you were measuring volatile sulfur compounds, and I was curious how those levels of volatile sulfur compounds compared to terpene levels in the plants.
Yeah, I would love to speak on this because I mean that research publication that we did with Ian Oswald, TJ Martin, and Stravinsky's, and Marcos, that was a research study that we wanted to tackle since the inception of ABSTRAX. Like, we want to know what the skunk is, because we know for a fact that skunk is not a terpene. We know in all the data, we have all the terpenes, we have hundreds and hundreds of terpenes. None of them smell like skunk. And so it's been bothering any scientist that walks through the door and asks the question. And so, that was our mission, to find that skunk. That skunk, that fuel, that gas, there's all types of different type of thiols out there. We know for a fact it wasn't the terpenes because we had all the terpenes isolated, purified. We had several methods to purify them further and further to try and figure out sensory wise what's going on here. And so the question was, how much of an effect do those thiols have on the blend? And so when I talk to somebody about this, your terpenes, your nose will, your nose is extremely sophisticated organ. You can smell terpenes in like a ppm range, which is like parts per million. So like if you had like a glass of terpenes in front of you, like you could smell it from like across the room, or you could smell it, washing around. When you smell your beer, you're smelling some terpenes. It's on the top note. But those thiols, your nose is programmed to smell a thiol in parts per trillion, which is, just recently analytical equipment could pick it up that far. That's like a recent advancement in analytical chemistry. And so call it luck and timing where we are in life and history that we're able to put all that stuff together and detect that. But, when they, like a common thiol, for example, is, when you're filling gas up if you're filling your car up at the pump and you smell that gas doesn't actually have a smell to it. They dope it with that thiol in parts per trillion. So you can smell if you have a gas leak. It's the whole reason they do it. It's totally different thiols. It's an entire, class of chemicals, totally different than the ones that are in your cannabis. But in your cannabis, those thiols are in parts per billion. So they're even more pronounced gas. And it's, we're in really small units here. We're in like parts per million, parts per billion, parts per trillion. And these are hard for, your average person to kind of grasp the scale here. Human minds aren't really programmed for magnitudes and scalability. But like if you had a tip of a thimble, right, or a tip of a needle, and you had a thiol, if you just dip that in pure thiols, you'd be smelling that all day long. If you got it on you, you wouldn't be able to get rid of it. Like, it is extremely pungent. And so we actually wrote an algorithm to kind of encapsulate, how, how pungent is this strain? And because the pungency of a terpene is so different by orders of magnitude than thiols, that we have to compensate for those differences. And there's a whole lot of other types of complications in there, like vapor pressures when one leaves and the other one stays. Like there's all types of different differences there, which again makes cannabis really unique, because it's one of the few plants in the world that produces so many thiols. I can only think of a few other plants that makes that variety of thiols. Actually, I think it actually creates the most variety of thiols.
Do you know if cannabis creates that many thiols, do you know what the functionality of those molecules is in the plant?
Ooh, that's a good question. Like, why does the plant produce those thiols?
Yeah, and I think in correlation with your study, they increased over time. I think it was like 10 to 12 weeks. You definitely saw a spike in those volatile sulfur compounds compared to fairly baseline levels for the first 8, 9, 10 weeks.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're talking about molecularly why it produces it. At first I went to like prehistorically, why did cannabis produce it? I would say like through history, right? I think the plant probably produced that as like a to ward away animals that would eat the plant, and probably attract pollinators to start with. But like go back a couple thousand years and I bet you people would bred it to be that way. Coming back to what you're talking about with Avery Gilbert, people would smell quote unquote potency. People often correlate like gassiness or skunkiness with potency, right? Because usually it's really heavy resinous content flowers that have those gassy notes. So people like will just correlate, they'll naturally correlate gassiness or skunkiness with potency, right? And so I think going back, I think why the plant produces it, people have been breeding it that way to get that smell. But if you're going back chemically into it, why the plant produces that, we're actually investigating that right now, exactly how the plant produces that. And that's actually like a more difficult question to get. How far back can we get? Can we link genes to the production of that plant? Or is it more like, like garlic, for example? Like when you break open garlic, it doesn't just have those thiols, it produces those thiols after you break a protein or something like that, when you crack or grind garlic up. And so there's all types of avenues that we're exploring currently as to how and why the plant produces those thiols, and such a range of thiols too. So, I mean, there's got to be something, maybe it's a promiscuous enzyme. Maybe we're making all these different types of larger compounds that we're just breaking down when we're breaking the nug up. But it's a great question. It's gonna definitely annoy a lot of scientists until we answer it.
I'm definitely keen to, if you guys are diving into that, I'm definitely keen to hear more about that. Maybe somebody out there, one of our listeners, knows the answer. And it seems that cannabis produces key ingredients at pertinent times in its growth stages to do exactly what you were talking about, to kind of fend off herbivores or protect it from UV light and things like that. So I think for my last question here, Kevin, the paper also discussed that these volatile sulfur compounds significantly degraded over time, and it makes sense because they are volatile and they're present in low levels. And I was curious what you would suggest to better preserve these aroma and flavor compounds in products that might be, maybe going from fresh plant all the way through some type of packaging.
Yeah. So shelf life stability, that's a big one, especially as cannabis moves. Cannabis is getting larger and larger, and we're maturing more and more. We're still, an infant industry, but, we are getting more sophisticated, and shelf life stability is something that, larger brands definitely have their eye on. And I think it's important for your average consumer to understand that we're talking about vapor pressure here, right? And I think something that's cool to think about is, the whole reason you can smell a cannabis flower is because, it's literally off-gassing and going in your nose and tickling your nose receptors. And so for that to happen, there has to be an associated vapor pressure, and the vapor pressure of terpenes is higher, so it flashes off less than a thiol, which has a lower vapor pressure. So when these plants are grown and you see them in the paper, those thiols only start getting produced, I believe it was like more significantly in like week 4, week 5 of flower, and then it starts ramping up until harvest, and then it starts tapering off. But the plant's not producing more thiols after it's cured, right? It's just gonna vapor, it's gonna flash off, and it's gonna be depleted. And so because it has a lower vapor pressure, it's more keen to flash off quicker. So if you're going to put it in packaging, I would definitely ensure that you have good packaging that doesn't have leaks in it. I mean, if you could store under pressure, that would be kind of like a weird out of the box way to store, but it could work. What other ways could you have a better shelf life? I think picking your final storage on the shelf is going to be very important in the future. You don't want to have something that's going to be able to, just off gas out of the jar. You don't want to be able to smell your weed while it's in the jar for certain, because eventually, if it's totally sealed, stuff will flash off for sure, but it'll fill that area it's stuck in, and then it'll just reach, equilibrium, and then just won't flash off anymore. So when someone eventually opens it, they'll get that initial wave, but then it'll be preserved more or less, as long as it's not leaking. We've seen a lot of bad packaging out there. There's a lot of these like little plastic bags or Mylar bags that people are putting it in. And, we've seen some types of Mylar will like absorb terpenes. So that's not helping you out very much. We've seen a lot of, those pop tops. There's some pop tops that are really great that'll like lock, and there's some top tops that'll like just bleed, or, things will just, you can smell the flower from outside the pop top, which is great.
Yeah, so, it seems like we're as you dive in and determine all of these different molecules, we're kind of chasing them from harvest to consumption to try to maximize that experience.
Yeah, I think brands are going to have to, they have big decisions to make in the future. And I think those packaging choices, a lot of people are focused on price or branding. And, I hope that this is a big consideration in their packaging choices, is exactly like what's going to preserve the terpenes the best.
Well, Kevin, I appreciate you talking with us today. Your dedication to diving into cannabis from a terpene and organoleptic perspective is quite remarkable, and I look forward, as always, to seeing what ABSTRAX does next.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason. It's always a pleasure to be here with you, man.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you next time on Terpenes and Testing, the podcast. Until then, please come visit us at www.terpenesandtesting.com or on one of our social media platforms. Cheers.